Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. I am going to be sharing with you some fun and easy patriotic DIYs today. I know that for some people it's a little bit early, but it's not for me because I like to start putting my patriotic stuff out starting around Memorial Day and leave it out for the summer. But if it's not quite time for you yet, you can tuck these away and pull them out in about another month or so. But anyways, let's get started with today's DIYs. For this first one, I'm using this sign. This is from the Dollar Tree from Christmas, but I think I picked it up at the end of the season when it was 50 cents. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong. But they sell these different shape signs all the time for different seasons and holidays. And I'm just scraping off the wonderful. I wasn't worried about saving that because I didn't really think I'd have another use for it. Pulling up any chunks of hot glue, it really came off pretty easily. And then I'm going to sand it down just to smooth it out. You could certainly use the back of the sign, but this is pretty easy to make over, and then I didn't have to worry about covering it. So I'm just giving this a coat of a Waverly chalk paint in the color white. I might have done a couple coats. I really didn't need a full coverage because we're actually going to be covering it, but I didn't want any of the words and stuff to peek through. We're going to cover it with some fabric. I'm also going along the edges just because I figured some white would get on it anyway. So I figured I would just make it, I don't know, look more finished. And then we're going to put a thick coat of Mod Podge on to our sign. We are going to make sure we get all of the edges, and I kept getting some chunks of Mod Podge, I think because I was pouring it out, and so some little chunks had fallen in the bottom or whatever, but that's okay. I also feel like the sponge brush left some little flecks, but it didn't really matter at that part because we're going to cover it up. This is some red and white checkered fabric that I had picked up from the Dollar Tree, I don't know, last year, year before, and I'm just using my iron. I forgot at first that you're supposed to use parchment paper, so I went and got that. I'm just using my iron on with no steam in it, and this kind of reactivates the Mod Podge, and you get a really nice, a really smooth adherence. So I flipped it over to trim it, and I was like, oh my gosh, how did I not make sure that this was straight? So I'm like trying to figure out what to do. Anyways, the Mod Podge does stick really well, but I was able to fairly easily pull it off. First I tried just pulling off part of it, and then I was like, nah, forget it. We're just going to pull it all off, reline it. I didn't have to add more Mod Podge. I just straightened it up and reactivated it with the iron once again. So I left that in there just to point out that obviously you should pay attention to that. So that worked out great. Then once it was all done, we're going to trim it. I'm trying to use this rotary blade from Dollar Tree. It works pretty good. It didn't work super great for this project. So I kind of went back and forth between that and a little cutting tool. But you want to basically trim off this. We're not going to get all of the details yet. We're just going to kind of trim off the edges. And then we're going to put a nice thick coat. I think this is where I keep finding the chunks. It was on this part here. But we're going to put a nice thick coat of Mod Podge on top. Once again, make sure you get the edges really, really good. Maybe I just need a new sponge brush. This kept leaving little flakes behind, so I was like picking that off. So anyways, you can see there's a little spot where the fabric was pulled and it's not totally straight, but you won't be able to tell. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Leanne. I enjoy sharing budget-friendly DIYs here on this channel. Typically, we're doing home decor and very much so on a budget, a lot of Dollar Tree items or like Hobby Lobby or Dollar General clearance. And so I hope that you consider subscribing and sticking around. If you are subscribed, make sure your notification bell is turned on so you don't miss out on my future videos. Now, once that Mod Podge was all dry, the fabric is super hard, and so it's easy to cut away. So I'm going in with this little tool. This is one from the Dollar Tree in the Crafter's Square. It's got different blades. I also tried using like a sandpaper to sand off the edges, thinking that that would work. It did work okay, but I liked the cutting tool better for this particular project, and we're just going to trim up all of the edges. Let me know, when do you decorate with any patriotic decor? And if you do, when do you start doing that? Do you wait for the 4th of July? I tend to put mine out for Memorial Day, and I just like to leave it out for the summer. So I'm using a little sharp tool to poke through where the holes were, or you can leave it if you are not going to be hanging it back up and just use it as like a leaning sign. I have this God Bless America sign. I picked this up at a Hobby Lobby last year on clearance. I think I paid like 40 cents for it, but I'm sure you can pick something like this or exactly this up right now if you wanted. And I'm just filling in the little holes with some lightweight spackling from Dollar Tree. Once it dries, we're going to smooth it out, and then we're going to paint this. I'm going to be using Waverly chalk paint in the color Ocean, and I'm just trying not to get the edges, so I'm going to use a smaller paintbrush, but I just really do one good coat. I don't mind if a little bit of the wood comes through. I like kind of the rustic appearance. There's a couple spots on, you can kind of tell here on the R in America that I don't know, the surface was kind of bubbling up. Excuse me. But I don't think it's super noticeable in the end. So just pointing that out. I don't think that's why it was on clearance, though. I think it was just end of season. I love picking stuff up at the end of season, saving it for the next year, or repurposing it for something else. Anyways, we're going to paint this whole thing in the color Ocean. And I wasn't sure with this sign if I wanted to add more, if I wanted to add trim, embellishments, if I wanted to add, I don't know. I just wasn't really sure. A bow, but I decided to keep it simple. So I put the hanger back in, and actually, yeah, I think that was the same hanger I pulled off. And then I'm using this wood Gorilla Glue to attach this, and I'm just going to put it on as much of it as possible. I smooth out some of the spots with my finger so that I didn't have a lot of stuff oozing out the sides. We're going to flip that over and put some bottles of paint on it to weight it down and let that dry. And that's all I did for this one. I'll show it to you at the end. For this next DIY, this little sign was another clearance find from Hobby Lobby last year, but you can use any sort of sign for this. I'm going to tape off the edge because I'm going to keep the blue with white stars because I just think that's really nice. This sign was not in horrible shape, but it was kind of scuffed up, but I also bought it for the purpose of DIYing it anyway. I'm going to sand down the front a little bit just so that I can cover up that writing a little bit easier, and I'm going to give it a couple of coats of Waverly chalk paint in the color white so we have just a nice base to work with. I've got these window clings. I love working with window clings. These are from the Dollar Tree, and I was just trying to find one that I liked and that I thought would fit on the sign, and that one didn't work. So picked out some that I wanted to work with. It took a little bit of maneuvering to figure out how to place it, and I'm showing you here. You can see the background of the window cling has a little bit of like a gray, it looks like almost like a wood grain or something. To make that blend in a little bit more, I'm taking some gray paint, very, very, very little of it, and I'm just dry brushing that across, making little streaks, and that's going to help match the background of the window cling and make it blend in a little bit more. And then I'm trimming mine down a little bit because I was having a hard time making this all fit on the sign. You don't always have to do that, but I was doing that. And we're just going to trim that up. I love these little tiny precision scissors. They are from the Dollar Tree, and they do come in very handy. And I'm going to use some Mod Podge and just put a nice thin coat down and place this on top. You can wiggle it around a little bit, move it around, and smoothing it out, getting out any air bubbles. And then this little flag, the only way to make it fit, I had to cut off one of the flags and trim it down a little bit. But I love how this worked out. Once again, with a little bit of Mod Podge, we're going to smooth that out. I'm going to let that dry a little bit so that it won't move around, because right now it does move around pretty easily. And once there's a little bit more tackiness, I'm going to cover it with some Mod Podge. And that's it. All right, here's another Hobby Lobby clearance item from last year, but Dollar Tree sells a variety of chargers as well. And I'm just using a window cling on it. That's all I'm doing. Now it doesn't stick on its own, so I'm going to use some Mod Podge, but I'm really glad I picked up this little metal charger with a cute cutout of the stars on the outside. Now, I didn't want to put Mod Podge except for underneath this because I didn't want to change the texture of the metal plate charger thing. So I'm just putting Mod Podge on the back of the window cling, just making sure to get all of the edges. And you do still have a little bit of wiggle room here to move it around. I smooth out all of the little bumps. I do not go back over this with Mod Podge. I feel like it was okay, and like I said, I didn't want to change up the finished look of anything. So that's all I did for this one. Just put a window cling on it, and I love it. So for this next one, this is a little spring DIY that I'm just going to take apart and use that pot. But it's a terracotta pot that was kind of roughly dry brushed with some white paint. And I put a piece of tape over the hole. I probably didn't need to, but I wasn't sure how this was going to go down at first. And I just elevated it with a little paint bottle and put a paper towel down underneath along with a little plastic mat. And I'm just squeezing out the paint and letting it drip down. And I like how this came out. I'm going to speed it up here for you. The key for me was to try not to let it drip wherever, like you could see that little drip came down, but it was right in line where it was going to be covered up anyway. Making sure to put enough that it would drip all the way down, but not wanting to waste the paint. And I just kept going. At first I did a little bit too symmetrical, and I was like, oh, I don't want it like every other. So I switched it up a little bit, but I let this dry fully. I let it dry overnight. I didn't speed it up with my heat gun or anything. I let it just, all the drips fall off like they needed to. I just felt like it would be better that way, and it was. I did end up covering this with Mod Podge as well once it was dry, just to seal it in so that it wouldn't chip off at all. But this is a fun little look. I like a little bit more like whimsical and bright and fun for like holidays and seasonal stuff, whereas my everyday stuff is a little bit more simple, like farmhouse, you know, a lot of black and white, natural elements kind of thing. So I had fun with my seasonal stuff, just making it a little bit more playful, I guess you could say. And this is how they all came out. This is the sign. The lighting actually looks a little bit darker in this, but I really like how this came out. It was super simple, but I love the red and white fabric. It's very summery to me, plus the 4th of July pattern as well. With a little pot, I filled that with a succulent. I chose this one out of the other ones I had because it kind of reminded me of a firework. Filled it with some white stones, and then the little sign and the plate. I will use these throughout my home. Sorry, the reflection on the plate, I could only do so much for that, but that's it for today's video. Please give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you next time.